And with that, I'd like to introduce the two speakers for today, Consuelo Fernandez and Xander Ernst. Consuelo is from Brokaw Nursery, so from the Hank Brokaw heritage of modification of the Froelich method. And Xander Ernst is representing the work of his father, Andre Ernst, and the microcloning technique. So with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll let Xander take over.
And in the meantime, maybe we can introduce ourselves. So I'm Consuelo Fernandez. I've been working for Brokaw for 15 years, based in California now, but I've been working in Chile, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico, as well as looking also at the business in Spain and working mainly with nurseries, new cultivars, and the management of intellectual property there. And Sander, I don't know if you want to talk about your background a little bit. And first of all, also a little, sorry, the presentation might be a little bit clumsy because we have 10-hour difference between Sander and myself in California. So we haven't had the opportunity to practice, but we'll try to do our best.
Good. Thanks, Consuelo. Yeah, thank you everyone for inviting us. I think hopefully we over all the jitters now after all this technical difficulty and everything. But yeah, it's an honor for me to be involved. Yeah, I think for those that don't know me, like Mary Lou suggested, so I'm Andre Ernst's son. So carrying on with the family heritage and tradition here in South Africa. So obviously very proud of our nursery, but also the large avocado business. And I think for us, really, I think a lot of what we do is passion and trying to drive forward, that's quality dedication, but also a dedication towards the industry. So yeah, I think from my side, Mary Lou and I had a bit of a discussion a while back in Mexico, just in terms of how, what the effect is of, good and bad cloning techniques, and how sometimes, that can also cause, very poor pre-production and in the end, poor orchard establishment. So sometimes, industries deviate from clonal systems to the point that, we might even be concerned about the future of tissue culture for that sense. Because even tissue culture trees, if they're not looked after, let's say in the big bag area of a nursery, you will also get mixed responses about the success of that. So I think a lot of what we want to do is move forward with that. I made a short, just introductory slide. Now, I would almost encourage you guys to scan that QR code or when you receive the slideshow, just to click on the read more, text there, it's a hyperlink. And just read this full blog post. So Seth is a marketing expert, not an avocado expert. But I do read his blog and I do enjoy his marketing perspective, but also his perspective on a few other things in life. And I think, obviously he says, everyone can go out and buy a lottery ticket. But in the end, you would almost, with the odds against you, not suggest to go out and buy a lottery ticket. In work, your odds go up, when you do useful and remarkable work. And I think that's why we're all here. Now, I think one of the reasons why I put in the slide is just in the end, avocados became, green gold and everyone jumped on the opportunity. So, from a nursery's perspective, we would say, the lottery tickets were bought and guys jumped into the nursery business. And I think sometimes it's not that easy, but also you get mixed results. On the other side, I think a large, reasoning behind this presentation is also for us, for the two nurseries presenting, to give you guys a good rundown of things that we believe you should look at when buying a tree, things that can go wrong, but also, to improve your odds at the end of the day. So you want to start your own useful and remarkable work right, And I think a lot of this presentation is to give you a background, but also to give you the tools to move ahead. So in terms of clonal propagation, I think I'm getting a bit obsessive about uniformity, but so almost every presentation that I do on whether it's pruning or anything else boils back to uniformity. And it's partially just because with some of our old orchards, our oldest orchards here at Alesbesta was planted in 1977. And, farming that's on the other side, you realize the cost of variability. Sometimes we will also still have bad orchard establishment, and you definitely see the cost of that, variability in the orchard. The other reason why I'm very focused on uniformity is the fact that farming has a lot of variables, climate has a lot of variables. So, especially with all these challenges arriving on our doorstep, we need to identify where can we control variables and, in other words, increase uniformity of our orchards or our conditions, So what does it mean? In my opinion, it gives you consistency of yields, nutrition, irrigation, spraying, pruning, and, in my opinion, literally almost everything you do on the farm. The more variability on the other hand you have, the more you have to micromanage orchards or specific trees or parts of an orchard. So, with that becomes a very difficult management system. So, and then I think moving on to our Merilu close the presentation is also, in the end, we're looking towards, how do we adapt new genetics to conditions? It's not every country that has high phytophthora pressure. Other places, salinity could just be waterlogging, not necessarily phytophthora. Different soil types can have an effect, and climatic conditions. So, which variety you plant also has an effect on, how you match rootstock and cultivar selections to reach that adaptability. So, I think in that sense, uniformity is quite critical. Consuelo, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to this point so far.
No, you can go ahead.
So in the end, the threats of poor clonal propagation, and as I said, this is really where it started the discussion between Merilu and myself. On our side, obviously, we sit with Maluma. It's a more precocious, semi-dwarfing variety. Those of you, well, most of you will be aware, with Luna, it's a similar structured tree. I think Consuelo has a lot of experience with Gem that has similar characteristics. Some of you with Pinkerton and many other varieties. And sometimes when you put varieties in these conditions, it could be very tough. But induce, further stress on the tree, like poor propagation techniques or poor rooting, you induce additional stress on the tree, which could sometimes be very fatal to orchard establishment. So if we do not, improve our ability to present clonal trees or sell clonal trees or the quality of the clonal roots, we also increase variability. And I think it's important to understand that the fact that we make clonal trees does not mean that per definition clonal rootstocks are 100% uniform. We want to assume that because it's genetically uniform, but at the end, the propagation of the tree and the quality of that final tree being delivered and planted in the ground and how it's treated in its first 2 months still induces, variability. So that stress boils down in time. And I think it's a very, detailed discussion to get into, but I want you guys just to hold on to that and just realize that per definition, clonal does not mean that we have 100% uniformity. Genetically, we do have uniformity. We've cloned the plant, but we have to understand that if whatever comes from the nursery is not uniform, we also create problems for ourselves. So with this, there's a lot of focus in understanding that we will not reach the benefits of new cultivars or new rootstocks if we do not ensure that we have proper cloning techniques. So just to emphasize the fact for you guys, this is a screenshot from a presentation that I did at our symposium. And it basically gives you a rundown of our top rootstocks, not just our own rootstocks, rootstocks imported from around the globe. The rootstock trial has 43 different rootstocks in it. And that's on the left is a summary of how many rootstocks beat Duke 7 So you can see by 10% was 28 rootstocks, and in the end, if you go down, 2 rootstocks beat Duke 7 by 40%. Now, to put it in perspective, those rootstocks on DUSA is about a 30% improvement. But if we do not manage to properly clone these rootstocks, we will never see the benefits of it. A practical example of that could be something like Valvic, which is extremely difficult to root clonally. So although it is a very good clonal rootstock, we have a lot of variability when we plant clonal Valvic because we do not have uniform root establishment through the cloning process. So in other words, last point on uniformity is that it really is difficult enough. Farming, it's not getting easier by the day, it's getting worse. And every shortfall that we have in terms of, 2 trees that are not producing, variability increasing, or every mistake that we make is an offset on our return on investment. Our return on investment and your long-term yield is a cumulative yield, but it's also a yield affected by, compound growth in that yield. So logically, if you lose 100 kilograms in year 1, you never get that back. And potentially that issue is emphasized or exaggerated by the mistakes that you make. So you increase a lot of variability. Nutrition gets more difficult because some trees are struggling, some are doing well. Nutrition becomes more difficult. So the more variability you have, the more you increase your variability. Yeah, Consuelo, I've been saying a lot, so I don't know if you want to add anything sort of to the uniformity discussion so far.
I just want to add one more point. You were talking about uniformity and trees, like the quality of the nursery tree that will affect the uniformity, also whether it's a clonal tree or not, so whether it's genetically identical. But then another point that we need to consider is how uniform your farm is. Because I know in a lot of farms there are patches of bad soil that will affect the way you farm and the way your trees are performing or looking. So I'll bring this up later, but one of the ways of the way the treatments, the management you do to your farm before planting the trees, it will be very important.
I fully agree. I think it's also country specific. Some countries you have a lot of soil variability. You can have soil changes within a few 100 meters. Other countries, you are quite fortunate. I think a simple example would be something like Peru. That's very uniform because it's, mostly sand. So, but it's a critical thing in terms of understanding that. And I think also, beyond soil, just microclimate effect on things like cultivars and rootstocks, and balancing that energy with, whatever clonal decisions we make. And I think it's important to highlight that at least with clonals, you have control over those selections that you make. But if you go the seedling rootstock, you've just, Mary Lou can correct me, but I can't say tenfold, but I mean, yeah, to the power of, how many, it's crazier the amount of genetic variability that you would then bring in, and you have no control over the point that Consuelo is making. So yeah, I just added this picture. It was a seedling planting that we were at in Chile, for example. Obviously, it's high density, so you can still get relatively high yields in year 1 and year 2. But you can see the variability between tree 1, 2, and then 3. Tree 4 is basically non-existing again, and year 4, tree 5 and 6 again, picks up. And this, in the end, is the difference between, let's say, a kilogram a tree in year 1, or, average, or, some trees producing lower and pulling that average down. The other side of it is this is trees of a similar age from our nursery, clonal, as Consuelo suggested, proper soil, preparation, drip irrigation, ridging, the works, and you have proper uniformity. There's no hit or miss. And that means you get out of the blocks fast and you can get, good yield uniformity, and it allows you to maintain an orchard that is uniform. So every tree needs the same nutrition, the pruning is very standardized, and so you continue. I think it explains itself. And then again, you know, sort of when you look down the line all the way through, there's no color changes in the trees. Just to put it, you know, in perspective, this is clonal Maluma and clonal Dusa. So basically, these trees were 36 months old at this point. So you get out of the blocks fast. So I think in the end, it's all about how predictable your yield is, how predictable your inputs are, your nutrition programs, you know, and in the end, in my opinion, uniformity or variability in an orchard is one of the biggest drivers in alternate bearing. A lot of people will say it's nutrition, and I fully agree with that. Some people will say, you know, something like the new varieties, you know, Pinkerton, for example, is less variable than Ash, which is most likely true. It's, I think it's sometimes with rootstocks also more efficient in taking up nutrients. But in the end, doesn't matter how well genetically you are, you know, advanced. In the end, the more variability you induce, the more you know, some trees react different to the fertilizer you give or the water you give, and repeats that inconsistency. All right. Yeah, can swallow anything again?
No.
Okay, and I think just a simple example, it's pretty old slides, but it gives you an idea of, you know, when we used to do standardized hedge pruning, machine pruning, seedling rootstock on the left and the clonals on the right. So again, consistency, you know, versus the seedling. So the picture on the left, just for reference sake, the first tree is a clonal. There was an experimental planting that my dad did. He reported on this many times. So it's clonal, seedling, clonal, seedling. So you'll see the seedlings are more yellow, whereas the clonals are dark green. All these trees were treated for Phytophthora and everything, but the genetic variability repeats. All right.
So yeah, so now I'm going to explain a little bit the frolic or the Broca method that we use here in California. I try to make it, I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible, but it's complicated. So for our method, we start with a nursery. That's the engine that will give the energy for the plant to heal those two grafts that we're going to put on it, and also to support the plant throughout the rooting process. So that nurse seed, we're gonna try to make sure that it's a strong seed, usually from the West Indian race, because those are the bigger ones that have more energy. And what we're gonna do in that nurse seed is we're gonna graft it with the clonal rootstock or the clonal selection. Let's use Dusa here, for example, just so to make it easier. Once we do that first graft with the clonal rootstock or the Dusa selection, and that graft starts growing, we move this plant into an ethylation room. So it's growing in the dark. And while growing in the dark, the shoot, it's gonna be growing white, and the cells are gonna be differentiated. So they won't know what they are supposed to be doing. They don't know whether they are supposed to like become green and make chlorophyll. They don't know whether they are supposed to be rooting or what the heck is going on. So when they get to a certain thickness and a certain height in this ethylation room or dark box, we bring them out of the darkness. And then at the base of that ethylated shoot, we're gonna make some wounds. We're gonna apply rooting hormones, and we're gonna put the ring. So here we go to the other picture where you can see that ring at the base of the ethylated shoot there. So there you can see the big seed that I was talking about. You can see that first graft, and then you can see the ring at the base of that shoot. Afterwards, we're gonna make that second graft with the scion. So when we put that ring, we're gonna unfold the bag and leave that whole bottom part of the ethylated shoot under substrate. So it will be covered with substrate. So this ethylated part of the shoot will say, okay, I'm still in darkness because I'm covered with soil. I have rooting hormones, so maybe I need to start doing some roots. So that's how you induce this DUSA shoot to start rooting. Half of that shoot is gonna be left above the substrate level, and by being in contact with the light, so that top part of that shoot, it's gonna start turning a little bit more green back again, and we're gonna put that second graph with the scion. So the scion could be the Haas, Gem, Maluma, whatever you're looking for. The reason why we're putting this ring on the base of the shoot, it's because eventually, as the tree starts growing, more roots are gonna start coming out from the ethylated shoot, so from the DUSA part of the plant. And as the tree starts growing, the thickness of that shoot is gonna start growing as well, and this ring will girdle and kill all the connection to the nurse seed. So that way, all of the nurse seed is gonna start dying, not at once, but it will die like throughout the following months. And in the meantime, it's gonna start continue helping this process of healing those two grafts and making those new roots, but eventually it will die and cut all the connection between the clonal roots and the nurse seed roots. This is a crucial step in our propagation method, because if you are not a serious nursery or an experienced nursery, some people have seen that this connection with the seed doesn't die or doesn't happen correctly. But in our case, because we keep our trees here in the nursery for so long, by the time we deliver the tree out to the grower, that connection is completely done, and the root system that we're sending out, it's the root system from the clonal rootstock. You can go ahead, Xander. So here you can see more or less, in this picture, I was washing out this, the nurse seed was no longer there. Those are all clonal roots of a tree that's in the nursery in the in field bags. And you can see also how the root system looks before delivering the trees, that it's usually very wide and thick roots. Go ahead, Sandra. And here you can also see how big we send our trees out. So we, in order for that connection to happen, this connection with the nursery to happen, we keep our trees very long in the nursery. We sell, so I'm not super high, but that my face there gives you a reference on how high or tall the trees are by the time they leave the nursery.
Yeah, maybe just as a reference, can swallow just, let's say, from seed to this tree size, more or less, what's, because you say you keep them in the nursery quite long, just as a reference,
Yeah.
how many months or...
So here in California, we do it 1.5 years. And in California, we also have, it could be less, but because people don't plant during our winter, we get a very cold winter, very low temperatures. So usually people are not planting into winter. So we receive the seeds for our clonal trees in September. The small liner bags would be transplanted out in the field into the big 3.5 gallon pots in March, or starting March, April, May, and then we would sell them the following year. So they will go through that first winter here in the nursery, and we will deliver them the next spring when people start planting again.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so basically, Mary also showed these figures. Basically, everything up until this point is very similar to what Consuelo just explained, so I will not repeat this necessarily. The only difference, the only first difference in the process, let's say from a simple point of view, is instead of using a liner bag and pulling it up post etulation and rooting, we insert little microclone containers after doing rooting, which contains grow medium and everything. So this then initializes the new plants. So again, just instead of pulling up the bag, we insert containers. In the past, this used to be little wire rods that we used to put in just to hold the containers in place. This is now changed to little plastic, support systems. And then basically from here, the plant would grow on, develop its roots, and then we'll go into cultivar grafting. Once we have a successful cultivar graft and sufficient root establishment, the plants are then severed, managed in the greenhouse in little trays like that, and then basically just start conditioning the plants either for shipment as microclones that we pack 100 in a box, or we would, then plant into the big bag. So we'll prepare the big bags in the shaded area, and then do the transplanting in the big bags, where after the tree will grow from this phase. Now, the reason why I asked Consuelo just to quickly, just mention how long it is. I think I'll get to our total process period now, but basically, where their plants spend 12 months in this last two phases. Ours is about 4 to 6 months during summertime, and then 6 to 8 months during the winter time, depending again climate. The difference, however, is our initial process can take a bit longer. So in the end, from seed to final tree ends up to be a very similar time frame. I think the difference that we often see that perhaps we can discuss is sometimes people do want to ship trees a lot faster when using the Broke or Froelich technique. One compliment that from my side I can definitely give Broke in the sense of the discipline of allowing that plant to sever the seedling root. I think Consuelo and I still need to agree on a term, because I think I called it severing, and then I think severing tends to refer more to what we do in this phase, but that's basically what the ring would do in the Froelich technique in the big bag. So in that sense, you saw on that photo, this one, how consistent the tree quality, through that whole area is. And I think that's the ultimate aim that we all aim for. So in terms of our total process, in terms of seed to microclone, we spend about 10 to 12 months. And then again, from seed to final tree, we basically work on a 14 to 24-month period. Now, the essence of this, is I just wanted to illustrate to you how complicated a clonal process can get. Obviously, I included a few things in here, like mother blocks. We in South Africa have to be very critical about sunblotch viroid testing, screening, and then ensuring that whatever budwood or seed we bring into the nursery is clean. You can see the different timelines and the processes. You'll also see that one benefit of our process is once we sever the microclones, we send the seeds, the nurse grafted plants, the rootstocks back into etulation, which then goes through another etulation period. So you tend to recover a few plants going back into the process. And that's typically some of these plants that can spend 2 years in the nursery. So a lot of our effort also needs to go into how we spend our nutrients and balance our nutrients in the liner bag that holds the seed. So in terms of final product, we like the visual inspections that we can do on the roots. This was typically at a point where we were sort of micromanaging our roots to ensure quality. I was going through the nursery and had this plant and sort of just took the photo. But that's typically standard process that you would do pre-transplanting or pre-shipping, is to ensure that we have good white tips, good root coverage, and then be regarded as ready for planting. Also, hardened off stage 1 leaves. So the process will run through for the rest of the presentation. Basically follows these key steps. I'm not going to run into them now. It's more, I would say, an index of what's coming. So I'll basically just head on, into one of the first steps that we need to look at in terms of tree quality and as nursery supplying tree. I think, we have to source, especially again in South Africa with sunblotch, the frequency of sunblotch that we have, seed source is critical. We index all our blocks. The minimum standard used to be once every 3 years. We ended up doing it annually. We number the trees, and this is basically where our, let's say, first sanitation process starts, and also the start of our traceability process. Consuelo, I don't know if you want to add on.
Yeah, for us, it's because our nursery is a source of energy throughout the process, throughout the healing process and the rooting process. We're also looking for very big West Indians, hopefully, seeds. So that's something also that we try to look for. And as you were mentioning, as soon as we get them here at the nursery, we would disinfect them. And also, I don't know, Sander, if this is something that you guys do, but we also like scratch the bottom of the seed, so that way the water will get into the seed faster and they will also germinate faster. So that's our experience.
Yeah, I think basically I can add to everything that you say. Definitely seed size is quite critical, especially, when you look at us recycling seed into a second round, spending that amount of time. It has happened in instances where we can actually get 3 rounds out of, good big seeds. So seed selection in terms of size is massive. Also, when we bring the fruit into the nursery and it's cut, we do sort the different seed sizes. So small seed then is not taken into the process. So do that. I think, it will take a lot of time if we get into all the technical detail, but we do a heat sterilization, also bacterial, fungal. And then, on our side, obviously, we try and speed up the uniformity of the germination process. So that's done either, in the ejaculation rooms where we have controlled temperature, or, in the greenhouses. So that's typically how we would speed up instead of scratching, the surface. But yeah, so I think that covers seeds for most of it. Yeah,
And
you can maybe carry on, yeah.
Sorry, Sander. I saw someone was asking about what our efficiencies are in the clonal process. For us in Broca, we usually start with twice the amount of seeds of trees that we want to end up with. So if we want to make 250,000, we start with 500,000 seeds.
Yeah, I think it's generally accepted norm. People would love to quote that with some microcloning technique, you end up with double the plants because you recycle. But the other factor that you need to take into account is how extremely strict we are with our tree quality. So you can probably get more trees out with microcloning technique than we do, but we still work on that sort of 50 to 60% success. But generally, when we do our seed calculations, we'll work on a 50% ratio or success rate. I think it's the safer side of things. Otherwise, you start to get tempted in terms of what you want to put out. And it's basically as simple as if you lose 1 to 5% in each step of the process, you very quickly get those numbers down. So I think one of the downsides of the microcloning technique is there's more steps in the process. So you really, really, really need to match your efficiencies to maintain good percentages. But that's why, we really try and focus on what our quality output is. So, but that's a rough ratio, and I fully agree. It's more or less the same. All right, Consuelo, you can carry on with rootstock selection and grafting if you want.
Okay, so rootstock selection and grafting. So in South Africa, it seems the presence of sunblotch is much more important than here. Like from what I've been talking to Sander and some other people in South Africa, it seems sunblotch a big deal over there. Here I hear from other, like every now and then a grower will have like 1 or 2 trees that have symptoms in an orchard. What we recommend in those cases is just to remove the infected tree and the 2 neighboring ones in case the roots are touching each other. But what we also do here in the nursery, we have been testing our mother trees where we source our grafts from, and we would send like compost samples all the way to Europe, to La Mayora, to get the trees indexed to be sunblotch free. The sunblotch test, it's a little bit of an issue because it's a tricky test that's not as, maybe the testing is precise, but the sampling method is not always accurate. So you can test a tree several times, and sometimes it can test positive, other times it can test negative. So that's why it's so tricky. So what we do, just to be on the safe side, we do test mother trees. We have like we go on a cycle. We also test some trees in the nursery, just to be on top to understand whether we're having an issue or not at the nursery level. The selection of grafting material, it's also very important. We try to have our mother trees here in the that are under our own management. That way we know the source of the trees. We try to get like younger trees. We prune them in a certain way. That way also we get more number of badwood and better quality. And we also try to, like, every now and then we send them for genetic analysis to make sure that the selection is actually the selection that it's supposed to be. And also our employees here have been in the nursery working for us, most of them for 30 years or so. So they also have a pretty good idea on how to distinguish one from another. But so that's pretty much what we do. Whenever we also treat our mother trees with some fungicides, especially during the time when we're collecting badwood. And we fertilize them and take care of them in special ways so they don't flower as much as a normal tree. Then I don't know. We also, whenever we cut the badwood, when we bring it into the nursery, we do some sanitation protocols where we disinfect the badwood, we disinfect our grafting knives, and we disinfect our grafting tables, the coolers where the badwood is stored. So there's a lot of trying to be as clean as possible, but as Sander will bring up later, it's not a sterile process. We are living in the real world, and things can happen.
Yeah, I think basically everything you said. The only thing I would add is you sort of mentioned about the genetic consistency, but I think it's also understanding that you can still select for better variations. I think it's a bit easier with cultivars to monitor your trees and try and, when you start establishing your mother block, a lot of effort goes into one genetic stability to make sure Dusa is Dusa, to make sure Maluma is Maluma, that you don't get some, bud spots or bud mutations, going into your fields, but also just monitoring that budwood doesn't get mixed up and things like that. So again, traceability critical. But that continuous improvement of your mother blocks is quite critical. And again, the more stable your process, even in the nursery, every step, like Consuelo said, sanitation, everything through, the less stress you induce on the plant in every step, the higher our success rates, the higher our uniformity in the process. And I think just to show that the photo on the bottom right here, again, a lot of effort goes into every area in our nursery to be very uniform. In the end, that allows you to have a uniformed approach towards managing the nursery, but also the final output. So the more stable every area or environment is in the nursery, the more stable the product that comes out. So again, sanitation, uniformity, sorting, all these things allow also the nursery to supply you with a better tree. So often, again, we'll get to it in the end, but nursery best practices definitely influence the final tree and the quality of that tree. So it's often good to visit the nursery, look at what they do, and get an idea for, what the standard is they operate at. Everyone doesn't have to be, type A's and, perfect. But in the end, it's about some discipline. And, everyone doesn't have concrete floors. People have other floor coverings that are also, clean. But, does that, give you the ease of mind, whichever method they're following, whatever they're doing, that they're trying to sort of, in different places, raise their game. I think that's the main thing. And I think sometimes, and I think it's a bit off point in terms of rootstocks, but I think just while looking at these photos, it's also important maybe to highlight that avocados, from our perspective, is one of the more difficult crops to propagate. If you compare the speed at which people amp up macadamia production, and how easily it's propagated versus avocados, or I don't want to highlight other crops, otherwise I might have a few people on my neck, by the end of today. But I do think avocados is a very, very, very tough, plant to work with. So you need to be very meticulous in every process. And I think back to what Consuelo said, sterilization, keeping control over factors. Okay. Cultivar grafting. I think, I'll add to this, or maybe Consuelo, maybe, head off and then you can just add. I think a lot of the same things we said about rootstock grafting. I think the main thing is rootstock grafts aren't that visible. So that's why I put in quite a few photos here of the cultivar grafting. I think we have to assume that it's a wound. It needs to recover. But the better you maintain that wound, the better you sort of treat the wound, you look after it, the better success you also get. There's a lot of technical things that we can get into behind grafting, but I think the essence of it is, in the end, on the cultivar side, again, monitor for consistency. We did a lot of effort over the years to improve our Fierte mother blocks and our mother trees, to the point that we knew we had superior Fierte, selections theoretically that outperformed, some of our older Fierte blocks, because we just over time kept on selecting from the best trees. And I think it's small things that keeps on improving. Some nurseries, including ourselves, sometimes when we get stuck, tend to collect cultivar budwood from commercial blocks. However, the ideal is that you do that from a cultivar mother block. Bring that discipline into your production process of, actually managing where do you select your cultivar budwood from. Because again, going to a commercial block, you have less control over that commercial block. The densities are different, irrigation is different, nutrition is run different. So again, you induce variation that you should not necessarily bring in. It doesn't mean that you're not successful, but again, when we look at what is a nursery best practice guide, I do believe, mother blocks adds a lot of benefit to the control that you have in terms of the final output. So from my point of view, and I would actually love either everyone's opinion at the end, or, but specifically Consuelo's, take on some of these, graft takes or graft unions, if you look at that. And I think, variable photos. And often with some of these pictures that you'll see, what we tend to see, and that's sort of, again, if you go back to my first slide of, guys wanting to get in on the lottery, there's more and more substandard plants floating around, and it's putting more and more pressure on high quality products. And what you now find is we've had clients that we've even supplied to that, literally take plants into a lab and start dissecting plants from every corner I've learned more about the avocado plants, in the last year than we ever knew. And you sort of go back to the nursery and you start dissecting and you're like, wow, this is interesting. And a lot of this, a lot of these things never influenced our production. It's been like that forever, but the end result looks good. And I think sometimes you have to assume that some of these wounds obviously recover, but it's sometimes difficult to explain that to a new customer. But in the end, again, we're happy to receive feedback and see how we improve the game. So I think the main thing when it comes to cultivar grafting is it is an open wound. And for the first few months, it definitely is something that needs a lot of attention and, to make sure that everything from insects to, infections don't happen in that open zone. My perspective, however, is most of the times when you have a bad union and these things occur, the plant does go under stress. And because we have a very strict sorting protocol, you tend to get rid of these plants, at least in the big bag area. And you hardly ever see grafts like this ending up on big bags. All these photos are taken from microclone deliveries that we did, or in our own nursery, just the sample cuttings to understand what's happening in the process. So yeah, I think one thing that we added was sort of incompatibility between rootstocks and cultivars. If I remember correctly, Consuelo and I sort of share the same opinion, is that in most circumstances, our incompatibility in our commercial rootstocks at least is so insignificant that the trees mostly grow out of it. But it is something definitely to monitor with new genetics coming into the line. But I can, comfortably tell you that from that rootstock trial, we've been monitoring rootstocks there for 6-7 years. Some of the trees that scored very high in incompatibility also gradually over time, it decreased a lot. It went from the extreme sort of more into the happy mean. But again, I think, I wouldn't make, from my perspective, a massive scene about that, overgrowth or undergrowth scenario that is sometimes caused by incompatibility. By the time a healthy tree leaves the nursery, we are usually, at a point where the graft union is perfect.
And adding to that incompatibility, so for me, incompatibility is when the tree actually dies or it's doomed from the beginning. So
Okay.
what we've seen in our experience is that Edinger seems to struggle with DUSA under our circumstances. So that's one of the combinations that we don't sell because we've planted the trees ourselves and they collapse like after a year or so. What other people understand by incompatibility, it's a difference in the growth between the rootstock and the scion. And for me, that's not incompatibility because it's a successful tree. It can live for years and years. And when I started visiting Peru and Colombia, where they use a lot of West Indian rootstocks, seedling rootstocks, you can see this difference in overgrowth. It's not as accentuated as in a citrus, for example, but you can see a slight difference between the width of the scion and the rootstock. These are trees that are 10 years old. So, and they are healthy, they look fine, they are thriving. So it's just a difference in the trunk diameter rather than incompatibility itself. And so that's one of the observations I've done when looking at other countries. Now, with our materials, the DUSA, for example, the Turkanian Duke 7, we don't see that difference in the growth between the rootstock and the scion when the tree is established and it's more than a year or 2 years old.
Can I add something real quick?
Please.
On this subject is that when we did our first avocado rootstock trial at South Coast from 1986 to 96, we did see overgrowth and undergrowth between the Hass and the different rootstocks. And the most productive rootstock in that trial was Borchard, and Borchard had an overgrowth, but it never affected tree performance. On the other hand, we had an undergrowth on some of the G755. So I would just say confirm what Consuelo and Xander have indicated, that in citrus, you know, we look at the trifoliate rootstocks and we look at that bench, and eventually that bench does pinch off the trees. But in the 15 years so that we ended up with the rootstock trout South Coast, we never saw that happen on Borchard, or conversely on the G755s, affecting the productivity of the trees. So we have to be very careful, I think, looking at overgrowth and undergrowth and assuming that that is really a sign of incompatibility. I think what Consuelo said about, you know, does a tree collapse on you when it's always on a particular rootstock? I think that's a more important consideration. Thanks.
Yeah, I think to emphasize what Consuelo said about, you know, by the time the tree either, you know, doesn't make it through the graft union or it makes it. And, you know, the more time you spend beyond the graft, the more the wound heals and the less you notice it or the less you see it. I think the most important factor for us is, you know, you do want to sell a tidy tree. So right or wrong, you know, we want that graft union to be as precise as possible. I think what I don't want to, how do I phrase it? So, you know, put it as lightly as possible, but I think it's important to understand that graft union in most cases is not something that growers need to be concerned about and try and, you know, start slicing open every tree because that's a success or a reason for loss or not. If the tree condition is good, you know, then especially on arrival, then that graft union 99% of the time is not the cause of later decay. You know, it's usually something else that happened. So, you know, if it was a poor graft union, you know, and the tree is in the field or you just received the tree, that graft union would be so poor that, you know, it would be flimsy, you know, it would have some play on it, or it would be weak enough that if you pull the tree a bit too much, you know, maybe a wind comes through, it would snap. But again, you know, for the time a tree spends in, you know, the Brokaw nursery and in our nursery, typically in most other nurseries, by the time it leaves there, you know, it's grown. And I emphasize it somewhere else, but a very important factor for nurseries to keep in mind in our point of view is, and it boils down to that nutrition uniformity, is you want to have as much growth, you know, not as much growth vigor as possible, but what I'm trying to say is you need juvenile wood. If that tree becomes too old in the nursery and it's stressed the whole time, you often have the most stressed trees, the trees that went through a salinity, you know, spike, easy spike. Those trees are typically the trees that, you know, the trunk starts growing, the trunk gets, you know, brownish, you've lost your green juvenility long before the tree's delivered. And that's typically a sign that the tree spent too much time in the nursery and it's been stressing and stressing and stressing. So the more juvenile the wood is often an indication also of this tree was propagated, it was pushed through the process, you know, nothing held it back. It is a stress-free tree, it went through well. And to have a tree like that and then start cutting through, you know, the graft union won't teach you much. But typically take a stress tree, that graft union will look something more like this. And then you have to look at, you know, is the shoot, you know, green? In this case, at least it was, but how does the top look? But typically, this is not something that I would be too excited about. But again, you know, in this case, we don't see the whole tree. But I'm just sort of trying to emphasize that guys shouldn't be too concerned about the graft union specifically. I think Mary Lou pointed to it, and I think that's a large part of this presentation is the importance of roots and establishing good clonal roots. Then going into disease pressure, virus prevention, we've spoken about, I think, monitoring for pests, even as much as in the roots. Now, obviously, you need to have pretty bad infections to get to this point. But we've had instances like this in the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. It's happened. You have a spike, you work it away. But it's important to understand that even something small like a mealybug can affect, you know, tree condition. It's not that you would necessarily see its effect on the tree instantaneously, but we have to assume that every stress posed to the tree affects the uniformity of what we put out. So again, a lot of discipline, So we even, from time to time go through the big bag area, cut open bags, sort of inspect our roots to make sure that we have active root growth and that we don't have funny infections that we're not aware about. Yeah, Swallow, I'm not sure if you want to add anything there.
I think we're lucky that our weather is so bad that for insects and diseases to come hard on us, it's very difficult. We do see some pests every now and then we use chemical treatment mainly. But I don't think for California that's very as much as a big issue as it is for South Africa, where you have the perfect conditions.
Good. And I think obviously there's a lot of pests that you need to look at. It could be anything from plant lice to other pests. Even leaf rollers and things like that. So I think monitoring practices is something that's quite core to what we do. I think again, countries are different, climates are different.
Yeah, for us,
Um,
thrips and mites
sorry?
for our thrips and mites are the main like pests that can affect us. And for that, we have constant monitoring, and we do use an external company that makes the recommendations and everything.
Okay, then in terms of the mother blocks, I think a lot has been said about this. I won't repeat too much. I think I just wanted to add an example of what our ticketing system looks like. A lot of nurseries have moved over to self-ties. I've seen barcodes. We personally also looking at that, different options. But I think the main thing is, everything from tree numbers to, the cultivars have different color tickets. So a lot of time, I would say, perhaps Alles Beste sometimes gets a bit anal about how much time we spent on traceability. But again, we have a very, sticky sun blotch situation. But also, if we pick up other diseases or other variations, it allows us to go back and trace a plant. I think the saddest part of this ticketing system is a lot of growers don't know what benefit they have with these traceability tickets and how important it is to keep them at the tree at least for the first 6 months or so that when things go wrong, you can go back to that. Theoretically, this would allow a grower to set up orchard mat. These days with technology, a lot is allowed in terms of, developing your traceability into the orchard. You can capture that data per tree and keep it forever. So it allows a nursery to go back and improve itself. It allows a grower to go to the nursery and say, I have a repetition of a problem in an orchard, can you come out and look at this? And, if the traceability is still in place with the grower, that allows a nursery to do a lot. And again, I think that's the difference between playing the lottery and actually, spending a lot of time in improving our processes for the long term. So again, I think we might be a bit obsessive about it, but it's something that we, are dedicated towards in terms of at least having some traceability. And Swallow.
You can go ahead.
All right, I'll maybe let you do the sanitation, although you have mentioned some things on it, but I think let me just have a rest a bit.
Yeah, so for sanitation, we are always conscious about disinfecting the green material or the vegetable material, so seeds, grafts, everything is sanitized. When we go out and collect graft, we disinfect our seeds from one tree to the other, our pruning scissors, sorry, from one tree to the other. We bring the material in the bad wood, we disinfect it here in the nursery before it even goes into the hothouse. We disinfect the grafting tables, we disinfect the grafting knife between one tree and the other. So there's a lot of trying to keep the tree as clean as possible, knowing that we are not sterile. So that's a challenge. Every now and then, what we've been doing is bringing some experts to look at our process and with a critical eye and tell us where they see room for improvement and how we can improve. So that's something we're constantly doing. Also, in terms of people, we have people walking to copper baths whenever they come into the nursery. That's mainly for Phytophthora, the same for equipment. So every delivery truck, a tractor, car that comes into the nursery, it goes through a copper bath just to try to remove any presence of Phytophthora and be as clean as possible in the nursery. And for the mother blocks also, we do have some treatments that we do to our mother blocks, especially fungicides and different fertilization schemes, so that way we can try to get as better badwood as possible. We have been talking about having our own mother blocks. We do have our own managed mother blocks in 3 different areas close to where we are. Now, that doesn't mean the process, the way I presented it, it looks very simple and okay, one step after the other, but in real life, it's extremely difficult. So you have to make the timing of the seed, when you start with the seed, to coincide with when the rootstock badwood is ready, and you have to make all that coincide with when the scion badwood is ready. So sometimes, because of weather conditions, those timings don't coincide perfectly. So then, for example, every now and then we have had to ask Mary Lou, hey, would you help us with Duke 7 badwood, because our badwood here in our own mother blocks is not ready on time. And we know that, for example, they have index trees for sunblotch, so it's a safe area to go to. Or every now and then, for example, if we have growers that are close by that we provided the trees to, we could also count with them. But we always try to, as much as we can, take the material, all the graft wood from our mother blocks.
Yeah, I think everything you said is 100% the same. I think one thing that I want to add just to how sterile the environment is, and for growers to understand that it's not sterile, is it could be open for debate, but we had the debate in the preparation to the session. We in the initial session with Mary Lou as well, is that there's also some comfort in knowing that it's not a sterile environment, because you have both benefits in terms of positive and negative moving into your transplant shock into the orchard. So if you can start building up, let's say root health, if you can start building up the plant's immune system, also working towards, planting out, there is some benefit in it. Obviously, I'm not saying introduce Phytophthora into your nursery and see what, survives. That's not the point. I think the main thing is just, I would always, have it in the back of my mind. If the process was 100% sterile, what would the transplant shock then be? So there are parts of the process that obviously, if we could keep it 100% sterile, I think it's the aim. We try and aim for that. Yeah, and then I think what you said about the mother blocks, that's yeah, I think it happens to everyone. I think the only thing we've done, and again, it's not as important in your scenario, but in the South African context, we would not trust any indexing done by another nursery or by a grower. We always have our own indexing records for that specific year. So if it's not within the last 12 months done by ourselves, we will then go and index it ourselves to be sure that the tree numbers match, our orchard plan matches, and everything, is collected from a source we've verified. Right, then, yeah, just a brief thing in terms of genetic variation. To give you guys perspective, you'll see the little self-tie tags there. This is some of our new rootstocks that were introduced into the nursery, planted out within a month of each other. but the variance in growth. And you'll also see, even if you zoom in, to the left here, you'll see the amount of buds on this specific rootstock, whereas this is more vigorous. Now, this AK3 specifically is one of our dwarfing rootstocks. So it's also important to understand these genetic variations from a nursery perspective. It affects timing, it affects our processes. Again, remember, the more speed we introduce into the process, the more uniform theoretically we can keep the plants. It's exposed to less variables. But on the other side, the more dwarfing a variety is, or a rootstock, or whether it's a rootstock or a cultivar, the more prone or likely it is to be stressed in the orchard environment. This does not mean you shouldn't do it. That's one of the biggest benefits. That's why often you get that dwarfing rootstocks get vigorous cultivars to produce well. It balances the energy. But it's important for the growers to be aware of that. We've often had growers where we'd go to the field and they would say, they don't have these same problems on their Hass trees they got from us. They only have it on their Maluma trees. It's a Maluma problem. But the fact is they perhaps over-irrigating and the Hass is just still more vigorous. So you'll have Maluma and Hass on both on Dusa rootstock, but the one is more stressed or prone to stress genetically. Its biggest benefit in terms of precocity and yield is also in terms of establishment. Often it's Achilles heel. So once you get to dwarfing plants, dwarfing rootstock, whether it's dwarfing or semi-dwarfing, I would really encourage growers to understand the plant before planting out. And again, understand what knowledge sits behind the nursery that is supplying you the plants. Or alternatively, get really good support in, because sometimes people are not necessarily, aware of the effect of the rootstock or cultivar genetics that sit behind it. Consuelo, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, we do see those differences in genetics, and I don't know, like, if it's that much of a nursery situation, but for example, because we sell trees of gem that are a year and a half, what we try to do is not to deliver gem in spring because they flower during spring, and we try to make them flower here, because when a gem tree is planted out in the orchard, so it has the stress of the replant situation, and on top of that, the stress of the overflowering that it's genetically part of a gem tree. It can defoliate and it could die. So that's why with the gem, we have been in the last years implementing this rule of trying not to deliver them until they have flowered in the nursery, they are dressed up and ready to go. So those are the comments about genetics that we're seeing with the gem. Because it's a low vigor cultivar, we also try to recommend, for example, a vigorous rootstock, so that way it has a better chance to survive out in real life where conditions are tough. So those are kind of things that a grower needs to be asking, not necessarily the nursery. Of course, we're always willing to help, but also to the farm advisors and people around themselves to try to understand what the recommendations and what the realities are.
Exactly. Okay, then just quickly in terms of root quality, again, we really encourage our guys to do root inspections. Often, this is typically a tree where, we'll get guys that will, dissect the graft union, because why is the top stressing? Everything's green, the top's stressing. But you have to realize that sometimes it's the roots that collapse on you, and, that could be a reason. Yes, genetically, this variety could be more prone to that stress. But I mean, again, open the bag, inspect the roots. And I, sort of aim for those nice, fresh white tips. I think, I obviously added the brand, but 2 different products applied in terms of the rooting process, or just, transplanting. And you can see the difference in root development. Plants at the top look pretty similar, but I would back the plant on the left to grow a lot faster and steadily into the next phase. So for us, roots are everything. It makes or breaks a plant. So having that as a buffer, as your support system going forward is critical. And again, the picture on the right, I would almost say this would be our minimum standard, really minimum for supplying a tree. We often see trees, being supplied to growers where you hardly have roots on the outside of the bag, or you'll have on the one side and typically nothing on the other side. But the roots aren't active, or you can see, the roots, it's almost like this bag here. You'd often have trees being supplied at this stage. Yes, the tree at the top is a lot bigger, but really when trees are supplied to a grower, we sort of want that bag to be as, filled as much as possible. So you can do roots rehabilitation, and that's why cutting, bags before delivery is quite important to us. This was a typical scenario where we inspected the bag, we weren't happy with what the bags looked like. We applied products, just spent a lot of time on precisely doing the irrigation, and you can see root activity coming back. And I think to me this again is a critical part. So if you do buy trees and you don't have the white tips going, it's not necessarily an emergency. But if you have black roots and you don't start seeing these white roots, often it could be a good option to ask the nursery just to look after your trees and, just do a bit of a rehabilitation program before sending it up. But nurseries might differ on this. I'm just giving you another best perspective on this. And it excites me to know a lot of people will look at this and say, no, the roots have gone. You can do this in the field. There's still a lot of active roots on the side. I think the real point behind this is you can have, reestablishment or rehabilitation of damaged roots. So again, if your root health is good throughout the bag, it's a lot easier to do that rehabilitation. And then in terms,
sorry. So yeah, so for the root system, we also need to keep in mind that there's a phenology curve in the avocado tree. So there are root flashes so those time of the year when you're going to see more active root growth than others. So if you're planting in the middle of winter and you don't see a lot of active root growth, that makes sense because the root flashes or the best conditions for the root to be actively growing, it's when the soil temperatures reach, I know the number in Celsius, I'm sorry, but above 12 degrees Celsius of substrate temperatures is when the root starts moving and starts waking up. So that's why you have to keep in mind and have that background whenever you're looking at the root system. And if the trees are not all looking super wide and active, it might be that it's not time for the root flash as well.
Yeah. No, I think the importance is, let's call it the yellowish roots. You don't want too much black roots. I think, if I can support you there, you don't want this, but as long as the whole bag was covered by that, it would have been theoretically fine. So, if you move to this picture, if it's winter time, yes, you would not expect these white tips. You would expect more, the yellowish roots. But I think, fully agree, the main thing is you don't want to see the brown roots. And again, some people will look at this and say it's Phytophthora. And I can comfortably tell you 99% of the time it's either related to, higher irrigation scheduling. You'll have a rot at the bottom. In our case, with the black bags in the nursery, we often find this on the western side of the nursery and the rows. Yeah, just a typical benchmark. I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm worried we run out of time. This I'll just very briefly run over. We often find, sort of the difference like this. And I think the main thing here is you can see the clonal roots are really good. But, typically when I see trees like this, just without spending time in a nursery or anything, one, it could be a sorting issue and trees weren't sorted frequently enough. It's foraging for light. It doesn't have good leaf cover like that. The other thing is you have good root to leaf ratio, whereas here there's a bit, yes, it's, again, roots and leaves will be in ratio. But I think, typically you wanted this to be stronger to try and push that up. So it means this plant has gone through stress. And whether, you know, I think the main thing is the clonal roots have established, the seedling roots are gone, but you know, this plant is going through stress. And you know, I think from my perspective, the main thing you want is, this isn't necessarily a realistic tree to send to an orchard. Everyone's trees don't look like that. Not even our own trees look like that. But the main thing is, we want to try and avoid something like this. The leaves aren't properly hardened off. It's very, you know, long, extended growth. You know, like I said, foraging, a lot of old leaves sitting, it just doesn't look happy. You know, to me, I want a happy tree. So, and I think what I'm trying to emphasize is, do root evaluations. You'll remember in Consuelo's first slide, she showed how they were flushing roots and looking at it. So it's a good habit for growers and nurserymen to do. Other warning signs, I'll be brief. 2 exact similar trees, same variety, same row, everything. You would feel that both is ready for delivery. This one, however, you can see the leaves are a bit softer than the one on the right. So typically we would want this just to harden off. Again, it could be climatic specific, seasonality. You know, if you plant during the rainy season and it's basically overcast the whole time, it's fine. But this type of tree doesn't like, you know, early spring, early summer plantings where we haven't had much rain, and it's, you know, high temperatures, low humidity, then you'll have wilting on those leaves. The plant will survive again as long as the roots are healthy. So, you know, some growers will, you know, back themselves to plant it because it will die back but grow again. But it's unnecessary stress affecting your orchard uniformity. So again, just the best practice. Then, yeah, quality control. Critical ways nurseries can ensure uniformity. I think just highlighting some of the things that have been said. I don't think I have to repeat everything. But again, you know, just really important to focus on the practices of the nursery, and sort of for nurseries to accept the responsibility that they do affect the uniformity of trees going into the field. Consuelo, I don't know if you want to add anything at this point.
No, I agree with you.
In terms of best practice guidelines, again, I think we should both maybe just give our inputs here. But, you know, I think a few things for nurseries to look at, but also for growers, just to have a brief overview. Painted stems is quite important for us in the South African scenario. I think it's, you know, we do it pretty early on in the nursery even, but again, before delivery, and we would sometimes even encourage growers to do it after delivery, because sometimes people, when loading, won't handle the bag, they actually start handling the stem. So, but this is critical. It's soft tissue. It needs to be covered. Other people won't paint, they'll put covers on. And then again, you know, you want good, stable nutrition. The trees are nice, you know, consistent color. Everything's nice and dark green, no salt burn on it. So in our view, no, you know, indications of stress. The traceability, you know, tickets, hard leaves, there's no soft leaves. Good sorting practices, you know, uniform trees going to the field. So again, you know, what is the general impression of the tree? And I think that boils down to some good practices that the nursery have, or some basic best practice. Swallow anything?
No.
Okay, so I think this was sort of one of our main objectives to get to, is to have a, let's call it a grower's checklist, or at least develop some simplified guideline. So yeah, I think, again, different industries will put different emphasis on different parts of, you know, this little diagram. You know, for example, there's a very clear standard in the South African avocado industry, or the Avocado Nurserymen's Association, that we belong to and that we are certified by, in terms of what the optimum tree size should be. We've had a grower, you know, ask us for a quote the other day, and he gave us literally to the measurement, specific measurements that he wants the tree to be on. And sometimes those things sort of make me very emotional, because you realize how some people underestimate the value and the importance of really good roots. But in saying that, all these factors, in my point of view, have very high importance. And I would almost say tree size would be the last thing on my list specifically, because I know once a tree is past its second, growth phase, as long as the roots are healthy, it just keeps on growing in any climate. Then you have other, nurseries, growers that do believe the bigger the tree they can plant in the field, the better. And again, I cannot argue for what other people do on their farms or how it works in other industries. I don't farm there, so I can never say who's right or wrong. I can give you the South African perspective from my point of view. But, without going through all of this, we've mentioned a lot of it. Ticketing, what the bag looks like, having good drainage. I think we haven't spoken about, good tree support stakes, having the tree nice and upright, strong support. But yeah, I think a lot of this has been mentioned. But if you typically had to ask me what I would rate as the most important factor in all of this, I would rate everything, and I would want everything to be 100%. But, if everything else was perfect and the roots weren't good, I would not supply the tree. So for that reason, I rate the roots very, very high on this. But in my opinion, this is something that, Consuelo and I, collaborated on. And I think we can have more inputs and take it further. But I also didn't want to add too many things on this, because typically this is something that I think a grower should have on his phone when he goes and, collects his trees and just reassures himself that he's happy with what his tree looks like. And I think, this is a nice baseline for what quality is. I mentioned there that hardened leaves, there should be approximately 10 minimum big hardened off leaves. The problem is that I often find is what constitutes a big leaf. Some varieties have smaller leaves, I think Consuelo said, well, if you want big leaves, just push your nitrogen up, So, tree size to me is very debatable. You can have very big old yellow leaves. Doesn't mean the tree is healthy. So once you start evaluating these factors, I think there is difference in the importance of it. And I think, possibly you could rank this, but typically if this was a score sheet out of 100 or out of 20, you would develop a percentage of how happy you are with the trees that you are getting from the nursery. So yeah, I think that's my comments on this.
Okay, and for us at Broco, one of the concerns that we have is that, or we look for a big tree because based on the conditions where our trees are going to, as I was mentioning before, the conditions in California are so against the growth of anything. Like if you go to Mexico, for example, where the weather is nice, they have organic matter in the soil, they have more than 5% of organic matter in the soil, then like you can maybe go like easier on planting like a smaller tree or a weaker also tree. But under our conditions where the soil conditions are bad, the weather conditions are also very tough. That's why we're always like trying to give the stronger tree and the more formed tree. And the same thing with the container. A lot of nurseries are growing in smaller containers where you can have the tree ready for delivery and the whole container full of roots like earlier in the season. So it would be also a cheaper tree probably. But for us, it's very important to have this big container with 3.5 gallon, and that the root system is all over the root container. What we do also is we don't have a bottom on our bags. It's not a real container, it's more of a sleeve. And that would also avoid, because we keep our trees for more time here in the nursery, for the root to start going, in Chile, we call it a pigtail, so going round and round. With the system of the sleeves, we can avoid that problem by the trees, the roots, when they start going down, they just stop growing and you got new roots, or they go sideways, but they don't necessarily go round and round. And that also allows us, for example, when we have like conditions of bad quality in our water, for example, to be able to manage the fertilization better, and also if we need to wash salts off or whatever, we can also do it easier because there's also better drainage. And I think we can go to the next one.
Yeah, if I can maybe just add on the tree size thing, and I think again, looking at that photo you showed earlier on, I think, let's call it the best practice again. It's not about absolute tree measurement. It's about a good, healthy, big tree, because you often find big trees, like I've showed in that previous photo, where it's a big tree, but it maybe still only has 10 leaves. Whereas where you guys have a big tree for your conditions, it's a very healthy big tree. It's good root and leaf ratio. It's good nutrition. It's healthy. There's no indication that the tree is struggling. Whereas some people are so obsessive about big trees to the point that, you start getting root-bound trees. You start getting trees that, they aren't optimally, fertilized and things like that. It's sort of a run against time where the tree is not happy anymore. And I think, that's what I would try and highlight with tree size, is tree size in balance with everything else is a good practice, because that tree will establish well. But often people are so, motivated by size that they forget how important root quality is, how important nutrition is, the amount of leaves, and etc. I think, we also need to realize the same importance of the roots. Your leaves is your factory. It creates your energy. So you will also not have further root development if you do not maintain good, foliage and leaf cover. So yeah, I think that's just my 10 cents on size, without getting too obsessed about it. All right, next slide.
Yeah, so handling recommendations. We always have to make sure that if you're taking a good tree from the nursery, you don't destroy it or damage it when you're taking it home. So we always suggest people not to hold the trees from the stem, like in that picture, be in the lower area, because by holding the trees by the stem, this is not a pivot root, it's like lateral root systems. So when you're holding it, you are hurting a lot, not a lot, but some of those roots, and you're paying so much money for a clonal tree. Try to keep the roots as healthy as possible. Then do not lay trees on the side. We've seen that a lot of people, when they are going to plant, they go through the orchard, laying the trees where like next to the holes where they will be. That can cause sunburn, especially in California summer. So be careful, do not lay them on the side. What we sometimes do is to put them in the hole where they will later be planted. Don't bump them onto the ground. So when you're putting them on the ground, a lot of workers just put them down and like super hard. I'm so sensitive with those poor little roots that I would rather put them there carefully and be more careful, and then plant them as soon as possible. We've seen that a lot of people take their trees home, and instead of just planting them the following day or as they get them, they decide to keep them for a week because the holes are not done, the irrigation system is not in place. We don't recommend that. And if you're gonna do it, remember to irrigate the trees. Do not put them all like in a big circle next to each other, like thousands of trees, because then you won't be able to irrigate the one that's in the middle. The one in the middle will be getting less light, so the water requirements will also change between where your tree is positioned. So it's very difficult to manage those trees when they are being kept in the farm. So we do a very good job here in the nursery because that's our job. But for a grower who's doing a bunch of other things, to make sure that all the trees are well irrigating, well exposed to the light, it's tricky. Next one. Then that's my daughter who planted her first avocado tree a few weeks ago. We are very careful with the planting depth. We want our tree to be a little bit on top of the soil when we plant it, because with the first irrigations, the soil will settle and the tree will go a little bit lower. We want the final tree to be the surface of the nursery substrate to be at the same surface of the soil in the farm after the irrigation. So that's why we always go a couple of inches on top. So that way, when it settles, it levels up and it's at the same height. These are clonal roots. If you plant it too high and it never settles, or you were overcautious and it never settles, all those clonal lateral roots that are there will get exposed and they will die. If you plant too deep, then you're gonna leave the neck of the tree, the bottom part of the stem, underground, and that can have some consequences like the creation of some diseases, or especially fungal diseases. We are also very careful when cutting the bag open, not to hurt or damage the roots. And then we're sure of the mulch or organic matter. To put some organic matter, we try not to make too much so it doesn't affect the irrigation system or the amount of water you have in your soil. So you do have to keep in mind your irrigation will change if you have mulch or organic matter. And we try not to have that mulch in contact with the stem of the tree because it can burn it. So that's why we try to leave, I would say, 3 inches or something like that between the mulch and the stem. Then the irrigation placement, if you're irrigating with a dripper, it's very important that the dripper or the drip is actually on top of the substrate of the nursery. That's because there is a difference between the texture of the nursery substrate and the texture of the soil. So the water movement at the beginning won't be as easy. You have all your root system in the just under the tree in the substrate, so you need to make sure that your root system is getting that water, and it's not just being put outside where the root system is. So that's why important whenever you are irrigating with drippers to put one dripper on top of the substrate, nursery substrate. Then nutrition and initial care in the field. We usually start fertilizing a couple of weeks after. You can start fertilizing right away, and we encourage that there is fertilization as soon as the tree goes in. Then stem painting or protector. We use protectors here in California, and if we're planting in the middle of summer or when we know that temperatures are going to be very high, we do paint our trees as well. We were talking before, I brought up the fact that your soil is not always uniform. One of the little things that you can do is to try to berm your orchard, so that way you get the best soil together on a berm, and you give the tree the better conditions. That can also improve the water drainage and the possibilities for the root system to get oxygen, because you're increasing the surface of air in contact with the soil. So those are some of the considerations that we need to keep in mind. Some of them can define whether your orchard is going to be successful or not. You're buying expensive trees, good trees. So once the nursery tried to do their best, trying to get you the best possible tree, this is the way to move forward and to try to have the best tree, to continue having that best quality tree in your farm.
Yeah, if you can just maybe add on the irrigation, I think, one thing that we do is we're not that obsessive in our own plantings about dripper placement. What we've learned is that if you properly wet the complete ridge or berm, as you call it, and it's fully, buffered, the whole soil is wet or the complete ridge is wet, then by just maintaining your regular irrigation scheduling, you maintain a very consistent moisture content throughout the soil. Often what we find with growers that do place, some people will block the initial drippers and just put 1 or 2 drippers on top of the tree. They often over-irrigate those trees. So I think, what we try and do is create a uniform environment around the tree as quickly as possible. So you have good, consistent moisture, because that also pulls out the roots as quickly as possible, and you start getting that root development through all that good soil that you've just, put together. So just something that we believe in personally. I know people have different perspectives.
So Again, this is how our trees look when they go out in the nursery. They have their protector. They are big trees, sturdy trees, and our soil conditions are not the best. They are going into tough conditions. So that's why for us here in California, under our growing conditions, it's so important to send out the toughest trees possible. And that's Norma from our sales office, in case anyone recognizes her. So other factors or issues that you need to keep in mind, crooked stems or trunks, you need to also keep in mind that there is a graft there, so it's not going to be smooth, and the fact that it's not smooth, it doesn't mean that it's not a good tree. That's also related to the messy grafts. Then the growing medium, does it make a difference to the grower? There are two ways or two different beliefs. Some of them say, oh, I can grow in a sterile medium. I will have a big root system. So that's fine. And some others, like our philosophy, that I don't know if it's correct or not, but we think it is, it's trying to make the growing medium as similar as the ground where it's going to go to, because we think that it's going to be easier for the tree to adapt. Whether we are right or not, I hope we're right, but who knows? Then we also have the root thickness. In my opinion, root thickness, it's one of the signs of how healthy the tree is, but not necessarily a healthy observation, but also it can be due to some different rootstocks. For example, we have observed that Toro Canyon in general tends to have thicker roots, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a better rootstock for all places, at least. Then the dead roots, whether it's Phytophthora or just the weather conditions, whether it was looking inside in the bag when it was in the nursery, or whether they were the ones that were on the outer side and they got burned because of the bag, of the dark bags. So there's a lot of thoughts there. Now, all of the nurseries, or at least Sander and our nursery, is always very conscious of Phytophthora, trying to avoid it, and we take all the measures possible to be as clean as we can. Then tree topping and versus central leader, that's another thing that nurseries can differ on, and you can talk to your nursery and see whether you want, or how they provide the tree and how they guide the trees while they are in the nursery. And 0.7, I leave it to you, Sander, because I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I think 0.7, I threw it in as a bit of a comment. We have a whole campaign in South Africa at the moment, sort of under SAGA, South African Avocado Growers Association, sort of under the banner of Blotch Out Sunblotch. You know, it's sort of almost a brand by now. Now, just to give you a bit of perspective on it, and I'm not saying don't worry about sunblotch, but I want to tell you how very interesting it is. I think I had a quick calculation done in the last 6 years. In terms of, you know, a dollar equivalent, we spent about $35,000 a year average just on sunblotch testing. And I can quite comfortably tell you that we're not anywhere clear, you know, close to eradicating it in that 6 to 7 years of active testing. You know, we every year when we find a positive tree, we remove it. And it's very haphazard. And what has happened also in our industry is tests have become a lot stricter, or a lot better. They're trying to improve the processes, you know, to have less false or less, you know, positive trees going through the process. The downside of that is we also have a lot more false positives. So we've had scenarios where we took 2 blocks to 2 different labs and you had complete different results. So it's a very challenging situation at the moment in South Africa. And, you know, Mary Lou spoke about tissue culture. In an industry like South Africa, potentially that's one of our only options to get beyond sunblotch. But in the meantime, we cannot give up on it, even though we're spending this amount of money. It's critical because it keeps on spreading. I think, we're more and more aware of how easily sunblock spreads. I'm not going to go into all the detail. I'm just saying sort of it's an active fight, but it feels like we're losing more than we're winning, even though we're fighting. So just for interest sake. And then, I think I threw in the question of can you propagate good seedlings? I think that's a good question that a lot of people can answer, and I think for themselves. I'll give you my perspective on it. Is I think through good nursery practices or poor practices, you'll also see variance in seedlings, and it's almost the flip side of what I said earlier about clonals. And I think it proves to the point that there's a lot of reason to have a good relationship with your nursery and also understand your nursery very well, and the effort they go through to give you a good quality plant. Because typically when you want to supply very, very good seedlings, you will also spend a lot of time evaluating plants, sorting plants, culling plants if needed. And I think that in the end is, in my opinion, the basics of supplying good quality plants. I'm not suggesting that people should go and plant seedlings, but I'm saying when people are left with no other option, or the industry dictates it, there's still a lot of reason to follow everything we've done in the presentation and still propagate good seedling plants.
And
Right.
Sander, one point towards your comment about the in vitro trees being free of sunblotch. The in vitro trees, so far, they have only been propagating the rootstocks. So we can say that the rootstock is free of sunblotch, but we cannot say that the tree is free of sunblotch because it will still be grafted with real life material. And I'm sorry I have to leave now, but if you can move forward to the next slide, and I can quickly go through that. So just to keep in mind, rootstock cultivar and terroir combinations, you need to know your conditions where you're planting whenever you're selecting a rootstock and a cultivar. You need to know your soil, get all the samples possible. Also try to work your soil before you plant any trees. We encourage the construction of berms. Then test different rootstocks. Don't necessarily commit to the best one because it's the most sold one in the nursery, but in the industry. Try to look for otherwise that you think will fit your conditions and go ahead and try them because there are many new rootstocks coming out. Then go out and visit. Don't stay in your corner of the world. Go to the neighbors, see what he's planting, go to different locations and have real life experiences. And stay connected, continue to come to these meetings. Industry meetings are very important. So we encourage you to stay as connected as you can.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really sorry I have to leave, but I'm sure between Sander and Mary Lou can handle the more difficult questions. I saw someone was asking about removing the flowers of the gem trees. Some people do it. It seems it has helped. Now it's very expensive, so it's up to you whether you want to do it or not. And I'm sorry. Thank you for everyone for listening and for not quitting before the end.
Thank you, Consuelo.